The afternoon sun in Prescott, Arizona, usually painted my living room in soft, golden hues, making the oak floors glow and highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air. It was a comforting sight, a testament to the quiet life my fiancé, Mark, and I had built here. Our small, well-maintained home, nestled on a quiet street with mature sycamore trees, had been our sanctuary for the better part of 5 years. We cherished the predictability, the gentle hum of cicadas in summer, the distant scent of pine from the surrounding mountains, the simple pleasure of our morning coffee on the porch swing. This peace was not just a luxury, it was the foundation of our existence, a deep-seated calm I hadn't realized I took for granted until it began to crumble. Every Tuesday evening, like clockwork, I'd wheel our single, city-issued trash can to the curb. It was a mundane ritual, but one that signaled the week's successful passage, a small act of order in our lives. Last Tuesday, as the sky began to deepen into twilight blues and purples, I pushed the heavy plastic bin along the short concrete path from our garage to the street. I made sure to align it perfectly with the edge of our driveway, just as I always did. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the distant bark of a dog or the faint murmur of a television from an open window. I went back inside, the mundane task completed, and settled into our evening routine, unaware that this simple act had just set in motion a chain of events that would unravel the very fabric of our tranquility. The next morning, the air was crisp, carrying the promise of another warm Arizona day. I brewed coffee, the aroma filling the kitchen, and then, as was my habit, I stepped out onto the porch to retrieve the empty trash can. My gaze went to the spot where I'd left it. It wasn't there. My brow furrowed. Had the truck come unusually early? I scanned the curb, then the neighbor's property, and then the next. And there it was. Not at our house, not even close, but sitting squarely in front of the house two doors down at our neighbor's curb. It was unmistakable, the same scuffs, the same slightly off-kilter lid. But what truly snatched my breath was the sight of bold, blocky numbers scrawled across its dark green surface in stark white paint. 729. Our house number was 725. A wave of confusion washed over me, quickly followed by a prickle of irritation. This wasn't a mistake, it was too deliberate. 729 was the address of the house two doors down. My neighbor, a woman I'd seen around but never truly interacted with beyond a quick nod, had apparently laid claim to our property. My first instinct was disbelief. Why would someone do this? What possible reason could she have for taking our trash can and marking it as her own? The question swirled, a tiny, annoying buzzing in my head. I walked down the street, retrieved my trash can, and wheeled it back to my own property. As I pushed it, I couldn't help but notice that her own trash can, identical to ours, was also sitting at her curb, now adorned with her house number. She had two. We both had one last week. Now she had two, and ours was branded with her address. I shook my head, deciding to simply let it go, a strange, baffling incident. I figured it was some bizarre misunderstanding, a lapse in judgment on her part. I wanted to believe that. It was easier to believe that. I wheeled the can into our garage, the incident already fading into the background, a peculiar footnote in an otherwise ordinary morning. Oh, how wrong I was. The following Tuesday, exactly 1 week later, the familiar ritual of taking out the trash was laced with a subtle undercurrent of apprehension. I half expected some repeat of the previous week, some sign of the bizarre, unprovoked territorial claim. But the night passed uneventfully, or so I thought. When I went to retrieve the can the next morning, it was gone again. My heart sank, a heavy, dull thud in my chest. Not again. I scanned the street, my eyes immediately darting to the house at 729. And there it was, sitting proudly at her curb, our can, still emblazoned with her house number alongside her original one. A surge of pure frustration, hot and immediate, washed over me. This was no misunderstanding. This was deliberate. This was a direct, blatant provocation. Just as I started to walk towards it, contemplating what I would say or do, the front door of 729 burst open. The woman herself emerged, a figure of chaotic energy, her eyes blazing with an unsettling intensity. She walked directly to our trash can, grabbed the handle, and started to drag it into her garage. My mouth fell open. My voice, usually calm and measured, came out sharper than I intended. Hey, what are you doing? That's my trash can. She stopped, turning to face me. Her eyes narrowed and her mouth twisted into a snarl. No, it's not. It's mine. I wrote my number on it, she yelled, her voice raw and grating. Then she pulled out her phone. I'm calling the police? My mind reeled. The police? Over a trash can? This was absurd, a scene plucked from a bizarre comedy sketch. You don't have to do that, I said, trying to inject some calm into my voice despite the tremor in my hands. My fiancé, Mark, is on his way home. He can talk to you. I paused, then added, trying to appeal to some shred of logic I hoped she possessed. Last week, we both had one trash can. Now you have two, just make it make sense. The words felt hollow, echoing the ridiculousness of the situation. It was clear logic held no sway over her. She simply scoffed, a contemptuous sound, and then she vanished inside her garage, taking our trash can with her. I stood there, dumbfounded, the Arizona sun already starting to beat down on my head, but I felt a chill. The sheer audacity, the unprovoked aggression, the complete lack of reasoning, it was baffling. I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling as I dialed Mark's number, needing to convey the utter surrealness of what had just transpired. He listened, his voice tight with disbelief, promising to come home immediately. When Mark arrived, his face was a mask of controlled anger. He's a calm, even-keeled man, but his protective instincts are fierce. He walked straight to her door and knocked, his knuckles rapping loudly on the wood. The woman opened it, her face contorted. Before Mark could even speak, she launched into a tirade. She screamed, her voice piercing the morning quiet, accusing us of trespassing, of harassment, of trying to steal her property. Then her words took a darker, more venomous turn. "I know your boss," she shrieked, her finger jabbing the air towards Mark. "He hates you, I'll get you deported." Mark, a legal immigrant who had built a life here through years of hard work and dedication, stared at her, stunned. The deportation threat, utterly baseless and maliciously targeted, hit him hard. It was a vile, xenophobic slur designed to inflict maximum pain. She continued, her voice rising to a crescendo of spite, claiming to have connections, to be able to ruin his career. She was a tornado of baseless accusations and vitriol spewing poison with every breath. He tried to interject, to explain the simple truth of the trash can, but she just kept going, oblivious or uncaring. After a few minutes, she slammed the door shut, leaving Mark standing on her porch, his shoulders slumped, his face pale with a mix of shock and disgust. Less than an hour later, the distinct wail of a siren cut through the otherwise peaceful hum of the neighborhood. A police cruiser pulled up to the curb in front of our house. Two officers stepped out, their expressions grim but weary. We recounted the story, from the first disappearance of the trash can to the unhinged threats of moments ago. They listened patiently, scribbling notes on their pads, their eyes occasionally glancing towards the house at 729. When we finished, one of the officers sighed, running a hand over his tired face. "Look," he said, his voice flat, "we know this woman. She's mentally ill. We've been out here a lot. There's not much we can do. It's a civil matter." A civil matter? Our property was stolen, we were verbally assaulted, our livelihoods threatened, and it was a civil matter? My heart pounded with disbelief and frustration. He continued, "We recommend you get another trash can from the city. Write your house number on it, clearly, and try to avoid interaction with her." Then they left, their siren a muted wail as they drove away, leaving us standing in the wake of their impotence. It felt like a dismissal, a polite way of telling us we were on our own. The injustice of it was a bitter taste in my mouth. We immediately contacted our landlord. We lived in a rental, and he had always seemed reasonable, if a bit hands-off. We explained everything, detailing the theft, the harassment, the police's reaction. His response was immediate and chillingly dismissive. "Just leave her alone," he said, his voice curt over the phone. "Don't engage, it's not worth the trouble." Not worth the trouble? Our peace of mind, our safety, apparently meant nothing to him. His words, coupled with the police's shrug, amplified my feeling of utter helplessness. It felt as though the entire system was designed to protect the aggressor, leaving us, the victims, with no recourse. The frustration coiled in my stomach, a cold, hard knot. This wasn't just about a trash can anymore. This was about our home, our safety, our fundamental right to peace. A deep, unsettling question settled in my mind. If no one would help us, what exactly were we supposed to do? What would happen next? A few days later, a subtle shift occurred in the neighborhood. I was out watering my small rose bush, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows, when I noticed her. Sylvie Beaumont. She lived across the street, a woman of 52 with shrewd, knowing eyes that always seemed to take in everything. I knew her only by sight, a quiet figure often tending her impeccable garden. This time, as I straightened up from the rose bush, she was standing at her mailbox, her gaze fixed on me. She didn't smile, but her eyes held a spark of recognition, a shared understanding. She simply nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture, then she walked across the street, moving with a quiet grace to my front yard. "Rough couple of days, huh?" she said, her voice surprisingly soft yet firm, with a faint, musical lilt that hinted at a life lived with intention. Her eyes, the color of warm honey, met mine directly. They were astute, I realized, missing nothing. "That one," she continued, gesturing subtly with her chin towards house 729, "she's a piece of work. Been here longer than any of us, causing headaches for everyone who dares to cross her path or just exists in her orbit." A shiver went down my spine. Had she witnessed the whole thing, the public humiliation? I sighed, the frustration bubbling up again. "It's been bewildering, honestly. The police, our landlord, no one seems willing to do anything. They just say, 'Leave her alone.'" Sylvie nodded, her expression unreadable. "They always do." The system, bless its heart, isn't built for these kinds of persistent nuisances. It's built for clear-cut crimes, not the slow erosion of your peace of mind. She paused, her gaze sweeping across my house, then back to mine. I've seen this before, more times than I care to count, actually. Sometimes you have to be more strategic, indirect. When official channels fail, you adapt. Her words were a balm, a surprising recognition of the profound frustration I was feeling. It was the first time someone had acknowledged the depth of the problem, rather than just dismissing it. What do you mean? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, a flicker of hope igniting within me. She just offered a small, knowing smile. Just keep your eyes open, document everything, every little thing, and don't react emotionally. That's what she wants. She feeds on it. Patience, dear. Patience is a weapon in these situations. And remember, she added, her voice dropping slightly, subscribe to Neighbours From Hell channel for new Neighbours From Hell stories daily. You'll find a lot of people dealing with similar struggles, and sometimes just knowing you're not alone can be a powerful thing. She gave me another small nod, a gesture of solidarity, and then she turned and walked back across the street, leaving me standing there, a seed of an idea, a promise of a different path, beginning to take root in my mind. Her words, strategic indirect action, echoed in my ears. It was a promise, a question, a hint of something more than just helpless endurance. I wondered what she meant by document everything. I wondered how much she had truly seen and what she knew. The trash can was just the beginning, I knew that now. The real struggle was just starting. The days that followed were a torturous exercise in heightened awareness. The incident with the trash can had opened my eyes to the unsettling presence of our neighbor at 729. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing a pattern of subtle, yet infuriating, provocations that had likely been happening all along, just beneath the surface of my awareness. Every morning, I'd peek through the blinds, a knot of anxiety twisting in my stomach, half expecting to see our freshly delivered new trash can, clearly marked with 725 in bold, permanent marker, just as the officer had suggested, vanish from our curb. It never did again, not directly. But the harassment mutated, finding new, insidious forms. The first new escalation came in the form of noise. Her house, which had previously been relatively quiet, suddenly became a source of constant, grating sound. Not just loud music, though that would come later, but a rhythmic, incessant pounding that seemed to emanate from the walls, sometimes late into the night, sometimes starting at dawn. It sounded like someone was hammering, or dragging heavy furniture, or perhaps even throwing things against the shared wall of our garage. The thuds vibrated through our floorboards, shaking the fragile peace of our home. Mark, usually a heavy sleeper, would stir, groaning in frustration. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, my jaw clenched, my mind racing. What was she doing? Was it deliberate? Each thud was a reminder of her presence, her power over our lives. It sounds like she's trying to build a new house in there, Mark muttered one morning, rubbing his temples, exhausted. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was doing renovations? But the sounds were sporadic, not like sustained construction. They were erratic, unpredictable, designed, it seemed, to keep us perpetually on edge. My meticulous nature, a trait I usually prided myself on, now became a burden. I started keeping a log, a spiral-bound notebook quickly filling with dates, times, and detailed descriptions of each noise incident. Tuesday, 2:37 a.m., loud thumping, sounds like something heavy dropped repeatedly, lasted 20 minutes. Vibrated bedroom wall. Wednesday, 6:00 a.m., drilling sounds directly above garage, sharp and piercing, woke us up. I felt silly, paranoid even, but Sylvie's words echoed, document everything. This was my first attempt at strategic indirect action, even if it felt entirely powerless. Then came the garbage, not the trash can itself, but the contents. Our street, like most in Prescott, had strict rules about trash collection. Bins had to be out by a certain time, closed, and certainly not overflowing. Yet every week, the area around her house number 729's two bins became a small, burgeoning landfill. Overflowing bags, some torn open, spilling rotten food scraps, soiled diapers, and unidentifiable detritus, would sit at the curb for days after collection, attracting flies and neighborhood stray cats. The stench, especially during the sweltering Arizona afternoons, would drift down the street, clinging to the air like a shroud. I'd see neighbors walking by, pinching their noses, their expressions ranging from disgust to weary resignation. It wasn't just an eyesore, it was a health hazard. And it was clear it was meant to be a public, blatant act of defiance, a statement that she operated outside the rules. This is beyond gross, Mark said one evening, practically gagging as we walked past her property on our way to the mailbox. Someone needs to call the city on this. I had already tried. Several times, I'd navigated the labyrinthine phone menus of the city's sanitation department, explaining the situation in detail. Their response was always polite, yet ultimately useless. We'll send someone to investigate, they'd promise. A truck might come by, pick up the overflowing bags, but by the next week the cycle would repeat. It was a temporary fix to a permanent problem. The feeling of being caught in an endless, bureaucratic loop was soul-crushing. Each failed attempt chipped away at my hope, confirming Sylvie's grim assessment of official channels. The harassment escalated. One afternoon, I came home to find my newly planted petunias, which I had carefully arranged in a planter on our porch, ripped out of their soil and strewn across the walkway. My breath hitched. It was a small act, but deeply personal. These were my flowers, my effort, my attempt to beautify our little slice of the world. This was a clear message. She was watching. She was actively seeking to disrupt our peace, to extend her chaos beyond her property lines. My hands trembled as I scooped the dirt back into the planter, a fresh wave of helpless anger washing over me. Did you see anything? Mark asked later, his voice tight. I shook my head, my throat thick. No, I was only gone for an hour. We need more cameras, he said, his jaw set. Everywhere, so we invested. More security cameras, positioned strategically to cover every angle of our property, not just the front door. We got a new doorbell camera that recorded constantly. It was an unexpected expense, a drain on our savings, but the alternative was feeling completely exposed, completely vulnerable. The constant recording filled our digital storage, providing a grainy, silent chronicle of the daily intrusions into our lives. Mostly it was the sound, the thumping, the shouting, sometimes distant, sometimes clear. Sometimes the footage would capture her, lurking at the edge of our property, watching. Just watching. Sylvie continued to be a quiet observer, an almost ethereal presence in her garden. I saw her tending her roses, pulling weeds with meticulous care, but every now and then her gaze would meet mine across the street. She never said much more than a simple greeting, but her eyes held a depth of understanding, a silent communication that felt more potent than words. I found myself instinctively looking for her, drawing comfort from her calm, knowing presence. I started walking by her house, almost hoping for a moment to speak with her again, to glean more of her wisdom. One morning, as I was struggling to replace a damaged sprinkler head, my hands grimy with soil and my temper frayed by another night of intermittent thumping from 729, Sylvie emerged from her garage. She walked over slowly, carrying a small toolkit. Having some trouble? She asked, her voice gentle. I grunted, pushing a stray strand of hair from my forehead. Something's off with the pressure, and I swear half my plants are looking sick. It was true. Some of my flower beds, which had thrived for years, were inexplicably wilting, their leaves yellowing despite regular watering. It was another small, nagging frustration in a growing list. Sylvie knelt beside the sprinkler head, her keen eyes inspecting the ground. She murmured, picking up a handful of dirt, sifting it through her fingers. Soil looks a bit off. And that one, she gestured with her chin towards 729, she's got a nasty habit of letting her sprinklers run wild. Or leak, seen it before. Can raise the water table, drown out roots, or worse, cause mold issues for the foundation. She looked up at me, a flicker of concern in her honey-colored eyes. Keep an eye on it and keep documenting every wilting leaf, every patch of standing water, you'll need it. Her words were a chilling thought. Could she be doing something to our plants? Was that why the water bill had been inexplicably higher? This wasn't just random acts of vandalism. This was calculated. This was war. My frustration morphed into a simmering rage. The constant vigilance, the relentless documentation, the feeling of being perpetually under siege, it was exhausting. Mark was growing increasingly stressed, snapping at small things, his calm demeanor replaced by a constant edginess. We found ourselves whispering in our own home, afraid that every word might be overheard, every argument provide fodder for her twisted narratives. Our sanctuary had become a cage. We stopped having friends over, ashamed of the chaos that seemed to radiate from her property, the oppressive atmosphere. It felt like we were suffocating. The joy had been leached from our lives, replaced by an omnipresent sense of dread. One evening, Mark came home, his face paler than usual. He slumped onto the couch, running his hands through his hair. She called my boss, he said, his voice strained. Again, this time she left a voicemail, rambling about me being a foreign menace and threatening to report him to some federal agency for harboring me, said I was involved in illegal activities on the property. My blood ran cold. What did your boss say? He laughed it off, thank God, Mark replied, relief warring with disgust in his voice. He knows she's unhinged. But he said if it continues, he might have to distance himself. He can't afford that kind of baseless harassment to his business. The deportation threat, once just a cruel joke, now felt terrifyingly real. It was a direct attack on our livelihood, our very ability to stay in this country. This was no longer just about property, it was about our future. This was rock bottom. The feeling of utter helplessness, of being targeted by someone utterly beyond reason, with no official recourse, was overwhelming. My initial sympathy for her supposed mental illness had curdled into a bitter resentment. She was using her perceived illness as a shield, weaponizing it against us. I walked to the window, staring out at the darkening street. The light was on at 729, a dim, yellow glow, a beacon of our misery. Tears pricked at my eyes, hot and stinging. We had tried everything: polite requests, documentation, police, landlord, security cameras. Nothing worked. Every attempt to address the problem only seemed to embolden her, making her attacks more personal, more malicious. I felt utterly defeated, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake from. This was a profound despair, a recognition that our lives were being systematically dismantled by an outside force, and we were powerless to stop it. What else was there left to do? Was Sylvie's indirect action merely a pipe dream? Or was there truly a different path, a way to reclaim our home and our lives from the clutches of this monster? This was where I broke. This was where I knew I needed more than just quiet advice. I needed a strategy, a real one. I needed Sylvie. The next morning, I walked across the street, my feet heavy with a renewed sense of purpose, towards Sylvie's meticulously kept garden. She was already out, tending to a row of vibrant fuchsias, her hands moving with practiced ease. She didn't look up immediately, but I felt her awareness, a quiet acknowledgement of my presence. My heart hammered in my chest. I had never approached her like this before, never sought her out directly for help. This felt different. This was a plea. "Sylvie," I said, my voice hoarse. I don't know what else to do." She called Mark's boss again. She threatened his job, his immigration status. "We're losing our minds. We're losing our home, even though we still live in it. The police won't help. The landlord won't help. We're at a dead end." The words tumbled out, raw and unvarnished, exposing the depth of my despair. Sylvie straightened up slowly, wiping her hands on a gardening towel. Her honey-colored eyes met mine, and I saw a flicker of empathy, but also something else, a steely resolve. "I know," she said softly. "I heard the shouting yesterday, and I saw the police. It's always the same story. They're called, they do nothing, and the aggressor gets bolder. It's infuriating." She paused, then her gaze sharpened. "But it's not a dead end. It's just the point where you stop playing by their rules and start playing by your own. That's where the strategic indirect action comes in." She led me to a small, shaded bench in her garden, a peaceful oasis sheltered by climbing roses. The scent was intoxicating, a stark contrast to the stench that often drifted from 729. "Tell me everything," she said, her voice calm and steady. "Every single detail. The trash, the noise, the plants, the threats, everything you've documented." I poured out the entire story, from the first vanished trash can to the latest, most devastating threats against Mark. I showed her my meticulously kept log, the dates, times, descriptions, even some blurry photos from my phone and grainy clips from the security cameras. She listened, her expression thoughtful, occasionally interjecting with a quiet question. She was astute, I realized, picking up on nuances I had missed, connecting seemingly unrelated incidents. She asked about the nature of the property, if it was a rental, if we knew who owned it. I told her yes, it was a rental, but we didn't know the owner. Our landlord was simply the property manager. "All right," Sylvie said when I finally finished, the silence stretching between us, broken only by the chirping of crickets. "Here's what you need to understand. Our neighbor, let's call her the nuisance, thrives on direct confrontation. She wants you to react, to yell back, to engage her on her terms. That gives her power. That's why the police and landlord tell you to ignore her. They think it's the path of least resistance, but it's not. It's the path of perpetual torment for you." She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with a quiet intensity. "My approach is different. It's about building an unshakable case, not for the police, but for the owner of that property. Because that landlord, your property manager, they don't own the property. They're just managing it. And believe me, property owners, especially absentee ones, care about one thing: their investment. And a tenant like the nuisance is a liability, even if they don't know it yet." This was Sylvie Beaumont, the quiet strategist, revealing her accumulated wisdom. Her voice was steady, infused with the patience of someone who had learned these lessons the hard way. "First, we need to identify the actual owner of that property. Public records, property tax databases, that's where you start. It's all public information. Then you compile every single bit of evidence you have into an undeniable, irrefutable dossier. Not just complaints, but proof. Visual, auditory, written, everything you've been logging, that's gold." My mind started to race. This wasn't about revenge in the petty sense. This was about justice, about reclaiming our peace using a systemic approach. It aligned perfectly with Sylvie's core motivation, her belief in strategic, indirect action when official channels fail. She was a mentor, guiding me through a labyrinth I couldn't navigate alone. Over the next few weeks, Sylvie became my quiet accomplice, my guide. We spent hours, not just talking in her garden, but researching online, cross-referencing information. She showed me how to use the county assessor's website, how to track property ownership, how to download public records. We discovered that the house at 729 was owned by a limited liability company, a common tactic for landlords who wanted to remain anonymous. But with Sylvie's astuteness, we dug deeper, identifying the managing partners of the LLC, two brothers who lived in California. Absentee landlords, just as Sylvie had suspected. This was a crucial piece of the puzzle. They likely had no idea of the true extent of the nuisance's behavior. Our documentation efforts intensified. Mark and I had installed cameras, but Sylvie advised me on optimizing their placement for maximum coverage, particularly for the areas where the nuisance's trash accumulated or where the mysterious thumping seemed strongest. She taught me about timestamping evidence, about creating an undeniable timeline. We learned to capture the stench of the overflowing bins by filming the flies swarming, the visible decay. We recorded the relentless thumping, using decibel meters on our phones to show the intensity of the noise. My evidence folder grew thick, filled with photographs, video clips, and printed logs. Every wilting leaf in my garden, every bizarre item left on our lawn, every discarded cigarette butt on our driveway, it was all meticulously cataloged. Remember, this isn't about confrontation, Sylvie reiterated, her voice calm as we reviewed our growing pile of evidence. It's about making it impossible for them to ignore you. You're not calling the cops anymore. You're building a case that hits them where it hurts: their investment, their legal liability, their reputation as property owners. Her patience was boundless, guiding me through each step, helping me refine my approach. She taught me to look at the situation like a chess game, anticipating moves, planning countermoves. The nuisance, meanwhile, seemed to sense a shift in our energy. My overt reactions had ceased. I no longer engaged her, no longer yelled back. This seemed to enrage her further. She escalated her attacks, almost as if testing our resolve. The verbal assaults grew more frequent, screamed from her porch whenever we stepped outside. One evening, a bag of rotting garbage, clearly hers, appeared at the edge of our driveway. Another time, the thumping from her house intensified, lasting for hours, punctuated by the sound of glass breaking. I heard her screaming at unseen figures, her voice raw with fury. My blood ran cold, but I didn't react. I just calmly recorded. It was a new level of terror, but I felt a strange, cold calm. This was all evidence. This was all going into the file. I was a quiet strategist, just like Sylvie. Then came the incident with the pest control. One morning, I woke up to find a swarm of flies buzzing around our porch light. It wasn't just a few, it was hundreds. And then I saw them, tiny ants, then larger ones, streaming from under the foundations of our house. It felt like an invasion. My stomach churned. I knew instinctively that this was connected to the nuisance's overflowing trash and questionable living habits. We had always been meticulous about pest control, but this was unprecedented. We called an exterminator immediately, another unexpected expense, but a necessary one. As the exterminator treated our property, Sylvie walked over, watching the process with a keen eye. Rodents, bugs, mold, she listed, her voice low. These are all direct consequences of unhygienic living conditions, and they affect neighboring properties. That's a health hazard, and a liability for the property owner. She leaned in conspiratorially. These are the things the city will act on eventually, and more importantly, the property owners must act on. Because if they don't, they open themselves up to bigger lawsuits, bigger fines. This was the turning point. This wasn't just about annoyance. It was about public health, about property devaluation, about legal responsibility. I suddenly saw the path forward with chilling clarity. Sylvie wasn't advocating for anything illegal or directly confrontational. She was guiding me to leverage the system's own mechanisms, but from a different angle, one that bypassed the overwhelmed police and the uninterested property manager. My dossier became a comprehensive package. I not only documented the trash and noise, but I added the exterminator's invoice, detailed notes about the spreading pests, and photographs of her unsanitary living conditions visible from the street. I researched city ordinances regarding sanitation, noise pollution, and property maintenance, citing specific violations. I even included a printout of the Federal Fair Housing Act, subtly highlighting how her threats to Mark could be construed as discriminatory harassment, creating a hostile living environment. It was a thick, undeniable document, a legal and ethical indictment of the situation. It was cold, hard proof, meticulously assembled, leaving no room for doubt or dismissal. Finally, the package was complete. I printed everything, organized it into a neat binder, and prepared a detailed cover letter addressed directly to the managing partners of the LLC in California. In the letter, I calmly and factually outlined the timeline of incidents, the numerous attempts to resolve them through proper channels, police, property manager, and the detrimental impact on our lives and the neighboring properties, citing the relevant city ordinances and potential legal liabilities. I included photographs, security camera footage excerpts, linked via cloud storage, and a signed affidavit from Mark detailing the threats against his employment and immigration status. It was a document designed to be impossible to ignore. "This is your shot," Sylvie said, her voice quiet but firm as I held the heavy binder in my hands. "This is the moment of truth. You've done everything you can do strategically and patiently. Now we wait." Her words were a powerful affirmation of my long and arduous journey. I felt a surge of strength, a sense of quiet power I hadn't known I possessed. This wasn't about being angry anymore, it was about being effective. I sent the package via certified mail, return receipt requested, to the California address. I also sent a duplicate copy to the Prescott City Code Enforcement Department, knowing that this was the body that dealt with public nuisance and property standards violations, armed with the precise language Sylvie had helped me research. It felt like sending a strategic missile, knowing it would land with impact. The waiting was excruciating. Every day I checked the mail, hoping for some sign, some acknowledgement. The nuisance continued her bizarre rituals, her screaming, her thumping, her overflowing trash, completely oblivious to the carefully laid trap. Then, a certified mail receipt arrived. They had received the package. And a few days later, a call from the Prescott City Code Enforcement Department. They confirmed receipt of my detailed complaint and assured me they were initiating an investigation. They'd already done a preliminary drive-by, they said, and noted the visible violations. This was progress. Real, tangible progress. A week later, a truck from a local junk removal service appeared at 729. It was early morning, still cool. Two men, wearing gloves, began to systematically clear the accumulated garbage from the side of the house, bagging it, and loading it into the truck. The nuisance emerged, screaming, wild-eyed, but they simply ignored her, continuing their work with grim determination. I watched from behind my curtains, a quiet sense of triumph slowly spreading through me. This was the landlords reacting. They were cleaning up their mess. This was the direct consequence of my indirect action. Over the next few days, a flurry of activity unfolded at 729. Inspectors from the Code Enforcement Department made multiple visits, leaving official notices tacked to her door. A pest control truck, separate from ours, came and went. Then a property management company's vehicle, one I didn't recognize, started appearing regularly, workers assessing the exterior, taking photos. The nuisance's screams became more frequent, more desperate, as if she sensed her world closing in. The thumping and noise, however, began to subside. She was no longer just targeting us. She was fighting battles on multiple fronts. About 2 weeks after I sent the package, a moving truck pulled up to 729. A large, stern-looking man, clearly not our old property manager, was there, supervising a crew. The nuisance was still screaming, but her voice was hoarse, her resistance futile. Boxes were carried out, furniture loaded, and finally, the two city trash cans, the original and our original, were loaded onto the truck. They were leaving. She was leaving. I watched from my porch swing, Mark by my side, his arm around me. The relief that washed over me was profound, a physical lightness I hadn't felt in months. Our street slowly, quietly began to reclaim its peace. The air smelled of clean asphalt and blooming jasmine, not rotting garbage. The only sounds were the distant chirping of birds and the gentle rustle of leaves. The monster had been vanquished, not with a roar, but with meticulous, strategic silence. The ultimate payoff. A few days later, after the house at 729 stood empty, an eerie quiet settling over it, I walked over to Sylvie's garden. She was there as always, her hands immersed in the soil. "She's gone," I said, the words feeling almost unreal. Sylvie nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. "She's gone. The property owners decided the liability was too great. The fines, the potential lawsuits, the damage to their investment. They issued an eviction notice, and when she refused to leave, the city stepped in with code enforcement violations that made her continued tenancy untenable. They even paid for her moving truck just to be rid of her." "But how did you know to do all that?" I asked, still marveling at the precision of her strategy. "The specific ordinances, the property owners, the way to push it through code enforcement?" Sylvie chuckled softly, a dry, knowing sound. "Experience, my dear, decades of it. I told you I've seen this before, I've lived it. My last house before I moved to Prescott had a similar problem. A neighbor who thought the rules didn't apply to them, a landlord who didn't care. I went through the police, the lawyers, the emotional despair. But I learned. I learned that the system has blind spots, but it also has pressure points. You just have to know where to press. And you, my dear, were an excellent student, resourceful, patient, astute. You had all the right ingredients." She stood up, her eyes gleaming. "There's one more thing you should know," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "The nuisance, she didn't just pick your trash can at random. I saw her watching you weeks before that first incident. You keep a very tidy home. Your garden is impeccable. You're organized, you're peaceful. For some people, that's a provocation. It's a challenge to their own inner chaos. She wanted to disrupt your order. Your trash can was just the first brick she pulled from your wall. My blood ran cold. It wasn't random. It was targeted. The thought was chilling, but in a strange way, it brought a final, unsettling sense of understanding. It wasn't just a crazy person, it was a predator. And Sylvie had known that all along. She hadn't just helped me, she had protected me, guiding me through a dangerous game I hadn't even known I was playing. The house at 729 remained empty for a few weeks, a silent testament to the war that had been fought there. Then a for rent sign appeared, and within a month, new tenants moved in. A young couple with two small children and a friendly dog. They waved when we saw them, their smiles genuine. The neighborhood truly felt peaceful again, a tranquil haven restored. The sun once again painted my living room in soft, golden hues, but now the peace felt earned, hard won, and infinitely more precious. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that some battles aren't fought with fists or shouting, but with quiet resolve, meticulous planning, and the wisdom of an unlikely mentor. As I sat on my porch swing, watching the new neighbors play fetch with their dog, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The fight was over and we had won. Our sanctuary was ours again. And for anyone else out there facing their own neighbors from hell, remember that there are always options, always strategies. Subscribe to Neighbors from Hell channel for new Neighbors from Hell stories daily.